Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the 82nd edition of the Philly Blitz podcast. I'm your host, Pierre Baptiste, joined by my co-host, Mr. Marquell Fripp Owens. Brother, how are you doing?
Well, beloved dub to those who celebrate. It is I, the one and only Mark Wilford Owens. I'm awesome, brother. I'm currently basically snowed in my house. I tried to leave earlier, and the ground was telling me, you should probably not do this, brother. So, what a better opportunity than to get some content done as the Eagles prepare for a playoff matchup coming off their victory against the Giants in the black uniforms, or as I like to refer to it, the backups in black.
Yeah, man. You mentioned it on Sunday. The Eagles they beat the Giants in their last game of the 2024 season. Since we last recorded, we now know the Eagles' first round wild card playoff matchup. They're going to be taking on the Green Bay Packers at 4:30, January 12th. That's Sunday at Lincoln Financial Field, man. What's your vibe heading into this matchup? Like, we saw the Eagles. They won, double-digit games this year. Jalen went out with the injury. They lost to Washington, of course. But they finished off the year 14-3. Green Bay, the way I look at it, they're in. I guess I can reference it as them. They're an interesting bunch. Like they were 1-5 in their division this year. They
Should be
essentially,
six.
if my math is correct, they have 2 wins against winning teams or teams with winning records. They lost both games against the Lions and Vikings. They were 0-5 against teams that won 11 or more games. So how are you feeling heading into this matchup, man? I know, like for me, I'm feeling pretty confident, I think.
I mean, like you said, man, the Packers are a pretty odd bunch. As you just mentioned, the whole conundrum of their record. What was failed to mention though is many of these losses have come by one score or less. Like basically, they were in and into the very end against these opponents. The Packers, I believe, they're a top four team in the league in terms of point differential. So it's not like we're facing some scrub unit. It's just a very as you faced it, a confusing bunch. Now, when you match them up against this Eagles team coming off a record or matching a record franchise record, 14 wins in the season for the second time in the last 3 years, finishing 8-1 at home, 6-2 on the road, it's kind of hard to. I don't want to say the Eagles are a house at this point because I mean it's interesting. We seen what happened last year at this point. The Dallas Cowboys, we all know their playoff woes. So maybe that's just a completely different situation. But the Dallas Cowboys sitting at the 2 seed, coming off a fantastic season, facing this very same Green Bay Packers team, who became the first team in NFL history as a 7 seed to defeat a 2 seed. So they are no secret. I mean, it's no secret that this team is used to being the underdog in these kind of matchups. I can't hear shit you saying.
Oh yeah, I was muted, my bad. But yeah, the way I like to reference it, looking at Green Bay, I think they just beat up on a bunch of bad teams this year, right? Like they had, one of the top defenses in the league this year, both against the run and the pass. I think a lot of their success on that side of the ball can be traced back to two things: takeaways, and then, like I mentioned, strength of opponent that they faced this year. Like I said, they were 0-5 against teams that won 11 or more games. Like a lot of their wins came against, I guess, lackluster opponents. Um, and just heading into this matchup, they're gonna be without Christian Watson. They're gonna be without J.R. Alexander. But again, like this team, they're interesting, man. Like even though like they haven't really played or they haven't had success against more winning teams, I guess, if you want to phrase it that way. It seems like, this year they've kind of found ways to overcome I guess any like negative situations that they face. Like they were without Jordan Love early this year. Malik Willis stepped in. They kind of, for lack of a better term, they didn't really miss a beat. And like I said, they've been without Jair Alexander, I think, since midway through the season.
About so.
Yeah.
Probably close to like week 9 or 11.
Yeah.
Between weeks
And it's
9.
like, yeah, and it's like you said, like they're no stranger to being a lower seed coming into an opposing team's house on the road in the playoffs and winning. They did it last year against Dallas. And I don't know, man. I think this Eagles team, They're different. They're different, right? Like, and I think that's the reason why I'm confident, right? Like, you look at the roster the Eagles have, just their overall talent. Like, they have a 2,000-yard rusher. AJ Brown, he was up over 1,000 yards. Devontae Smith and the level of talent that he is, he didn't get 1,000 yards this year, but again, the level of talent that he is, we all know the type of player Devontae is. Dallas Goedert, he's healthy, right? Like Jalen Hurts, he's gonna be healthy. Defensively, like this was the best unit in football this year, right? You have two, top flight corners in Darius Slay, Quinyon Mitchell, Zach Bond. He was the best linebacker in football this year. Like everywhere you look on this team, like the Eagles, they've been, one of the better like overall teams in the league, right? And I think, you look at this team right now, everything is firing on all cylinders. Firing on all cylinders. And I think it's coming at the right time also. Like, you look at the passing game, all the questions that were there earlier in the season. It seems like those, I guess, concerns have kind of been put to bed. Like since the Steelers game, they've kind of, found a way to get the, rhythm flowing in the passing game. Defensively, like we've talked about, the pressuring opposing QBs at a higher rate. We've talked a lot this year about the play of Jalen Carter and the emergence of Nolan Smith. And like I just talked about, the aforementioned play of Zach Bond. So, I think, that's why I'm, confident heading into this matchup, man. Like, the Eagles are the more talented team, from a personnel standpoint. But I think they're also, the more battle-tested team, right? Like everything that this team has been through this year, they started out, I think, 2-2. All the questions in the offseason about Nick and Jalen. Even this year, a couple weeks ago, the AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts situation. So like they've shown, they can overcome adversity. They're playing their best football of the year at the right time. And yeah, I'm like I continue like I've said throughout this, man. I'm pretty confident heading into this matchup.
So we'll get into in terms of like an entire preview of the game, probably on Friday. But so I guess my big question would be, I mean, what has changed between now and I guess it would be 2 or 3 weeks ago? We last had this conversation where we had me, you, Parth, and we had Anthony DeBona on, and I asked you guys what team basically, because what matchup concerned you the most, and all three of you guys kind of dated back to the Packers team, so you seem kind of relatively confident this time.
Did I? I said the Packers.
Yeah, all three of you guys said the Packers.
Oh, that's interesting to me because I don't know. Like, I look at this Packers team, like, I don't like where do they have the edge? Like, not at quarterback, not at running back, not on defense. Like, I don't know. Like, and we talked about this in the last on the last pod. Like, this Green Bay team, in terms of their receiving core, like, and this was when we talked about it. This was when they were at full strength. Like, they're gonna be without Christian Watson. So it's like for me, like, I don't necessarily see an avenue or an area where Green Bay, has a matchup advantage.
I guess to me, I mean, for Green Bay standpoint, I'm interested to see how they play defensively. I think their big advantage, which was always my point the first time these two teams played, the Eagles were always the more talented team, but schematically was where I was interested to see how everything was approached. Now, of course, these two teams are completely different from the first time they met at the opening of the year. But I mean, a lot of the same conversation is to be had. How Vic Fangio would approach the basically utilizing his personnel. We didn't have Cooper DeJean during that first matchup. Now we do. We still ran a bunch of nickel during the first matchup, so I'm pretty sure he'll stick to his guns there. For a Packers team who, I mean, they're really commit to running the football. Josh Jacobs has been tremendous for this team since his acquisition last offseason. Then, I mean, I guess for me defensively is the big question. How does the Eagles match up with how does the Eagles offense match up with the Packers defense schematic wise? Yeah, we were the more talented team, but I mentioned during the first meeting, Jeff Hafley's typical single high kind of guy, going to commit the extra body to the bunch, very reminiscent of the Jim Schwartz kind of thing, where he'd rather not get beat via the run, and he'll leave his corners on a bit of islands. But the Eagles have utilized Jalen in the running game very much over let's say, since the bye. They definitely utilized him more as a rusher, whereas this kind of defense, he's kind of his bread and butter. Like I mentioned back then, I kind of commented on it as a quote unquote college football defense. No disrespect, of course, but the goal was to make sure that you don't get beat by the 11th guy, aka the quarterback here. So, how will the Eagles' rushing game continue to strive with Jalen Hurts being not only just being the extra rusher, but being back to open things for Saquon Barkley that weren't there when he was missing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can get into the nitty gritty of this, on Friday, but just to kick off the conversation, I think you look back to the beginning of the season, first game in Brazil, Saquon, he was able to have some success, on the ground, and I think that having it, he
Success.
got up over.
He had a really good. He had a quality number. He had the 3 touchdowns, but one of them being in the passing game. But I think that was one of the Eagles' worst rushing performances by the metrics of the season. I believe it was that, Pittsburgh, and Washington. Those were their 3 worst rushing performances of the year.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I think that having a guy like Saquon, I think that can take some of the, I guess, pressure in terms of Jalen, and what you want to get from him on the ground. That kind of takes some of that off. I think it'll also allow them, just as the season has gone on, and we've seen more of Kellen Moore and how he likes to utilize Jalen as a runner and everything like that. I think that having a guy like Saquon, like it has all year, I think that can kind of allow them to possibly use Jalen sort of as a decoy in a running game. Also, I think I don't know how. I don't know if you have the stats like Green Bay against mobile quarterbacks this year. Like I know, like we've talked about, Jeff Hadley's whole thing is, we're not going to let opposing quarterbacks beat you or beat us with your legs. But I mean, I don't know. Like it's an interesting matchup to look at for sure.
Certainly, man. I mean, I guess the big thing for this is kind of like I phrased it week 1, is a prime opportunity for Jalen Hurts to show his stuff, for lack of a better term. He's going to almost beg Jalen Hurts to beat him with his arm. Like I said a second ago, they're going to give those cornerbacks they're going to leave them on islands, and they're going to give these receivers their fair share of opportunities to make plays. Now it's just, will Jalen make it happen? That's kind of been the conversation all season long. I mean, we've seen improvements over the last final month of the season or so, but it's the playoffs now. I mean, you have the conversations about teams at this point in time, they have nothing or no one else to game plan for. So they kind of key in on your flaws and what really makes you tick. And I think it'll be interesting to see a defense that really tests Jalen like, hey, come be a passer. I really want to see if you can beat me. Come test the middle of the field. The things are the metric that we were excited to see from him in terms of the improvement over this last month.
Yeah, so before we get into kind of the not weeds, but just some, I guess, more grand scheme things in terms of looking at this playoff run for the Eagles, one of the things that I did want us to discuss, something you tweeted a couple of days ago, about the whole transitional rankings or whatever. Just explain that before we get into it.
So I've had conversations, particularly during draft season or during off season, team building type of conversations with you guys very so often about how a lot of teams, they kind of stick to their guns with their ideological beliefs in terms of how they like to build. The Eagles, of course, have been typical for building throughout the trenches throughout their time. And I just think it's been, I mean, of course, we've given Howie Roseman his praise, particularly for the draft classes he's been able to put together. I believe since 2021 was when this crazy run started. But just in general, the ability to go from all pro to all pro in some of these conversations, like I believe Jordan Mailata via PFF was the highest graded player in all of football this year with a 96. So we talking about a guy who, he never played football. He was a rugby guy. He was part of what we like to refer to as Stoutland University. And just how we've gone from Jason Peters, or hell, even before that, with John Runyons, Trey Thomas, and those kind of guys, where you go from them to Jason Peters to now Jordan Mailata, just the typical success this team has had at those positions. And you compare it to some of the other moves that they've made, like going from Zach Ertz to Dallas Goedert. Zach Ertz, who, of course, made the Super Bowl leading reception for the team, and Dallas Goedert, who, I mean, I guess we can have the conversation about his health at some point, but for lack of a better term, he's been a bit of a
No,
mainstay.
not at some point. We need to have this conversation soon, brother.
I mean, yeah, at some point in the next 4 to 6 months, but we don't have to have it today. Yeah. But just in general, from a bunch of these different positions, trying to remember the other few that I know. Oh yeah, going from Kelsey to Jurgens. Go ahead.
Yeah, from Fletch to Jalen Carter.
Yeah, and you can even make the argument. I thought about including it, but going from a guy like Brandon Graham, who took a time, but to get to his point of success, but now look at where he is. Again, another mainstay. To Nolan Smith, who started slow himself and has slowly begun to build himself into a mainstay. How just the transition from some of these positions. So I wanted to see how everyone ranked those.
Yeah. So those top four, let's rank those since we're here, right? So we got Jason Peters to Jordan Mailata, Jason Kelsey to Cam Jurgens, Fletcher Cox to Jalen Carter, Zach Ertz to Dallas Goedert. So let's start at 4. Which one would you put at 4? Going from 4 to 1 with 1 being the highest.
Sheesh. I guess, I mean, we kind of previewed it a second ago, and it sucks it's like this because I'd like to think that Dallas Goedert is probably, I always stated Dallas Goedert was more talented than Zach Ertz when Zach Ertz got drafted. Like he had the ability to be one of the next big tight ends in this league, and we constantly waited for him to eclipse that top 3 conversation, and it's just he never quite reached it, but still a talented guy. So I'd probably put going from Ertz to the Goedert at 4.
Yeah, in my rankings here, my notes here, I have it the same. Like, you talked about it. Like, it's like for forever, we've been kind of saying Dallas Goedert breakout season loaded soon. Dallas Goedert, he's about to break out. Top 3, top 5 tight end, like it's coming. And it's just never seemed to, fully, I guess, show itself. And Dallas Goedert, he's been good, no doubt. Like this is not to say that Dallas Goedert isn't a good tight end or isn't a good football player or anything like that. But just to say that he's lived up to the same level of player that Zach Ertz was, or that player that the Eagles. I mean, I'm not gonna say he hasn't lived up to the player that they hoped he'd be when they drafted him, but just in terms of the potential, I don't know if you can honestly say he's ever fully realized his full potential, right? I think it's kind of been a little underwhelming to say the least, just because of the potential that we looked at him having when he was drafted. I just overall I don't know if he's lived up to the proverbial hype, and the injuries have a lot to do with that, of course. He just hasn't seemed to be able to stay healthy. I mean, hell, right now he's returning. How
much would you utilize into this conversation the fact that, I mean, he was never really the guy on the offense compared to a guy like Ertz, where he was the top target on the offense for a vast majority of his time. He never played beside, well, if he did, it wasn't for long, guys like AJ and Smitty.
I mean, you can look at it that way, but like that wasn't Ertz's fault that he was the guy, right? Like, it just,
I guess not necessarily his fault, but do you think that plays a bigger role into why his impact the difference in impact?
I mean, yes and no. It's just the overall inconsistency that we've seen from Dallas Goedert, right? Like, I think that's the biggest thing to me. Like, you look at the receivers that Ertz played with when he was here, right? Like, he was here when I think the tail end of the Macklin's last year was his rookie year.
I believe so, because I think he was like Chip Kelly's second draft pick. Well, that Chip Kelly era. We don't know who made those picks between Howie and Chip. That might have been Howie's last year, but Lane, then exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, he had, guys like Nelson Aguilar. Who am I forgetting? There was Alshon, Torrey Smith. Travis Fulgham. Yeah. What were the other guys' names? I always forget the other.
Greg Ward.
Yeah, Greg Ward. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think Dallas is just overall just
My gosh.
Bryce Treggs, bro. I'll never forget Bryce Treggs in 2016. This was when I was deep in the Twitter trenches. I was like, I think I was like, I saw like a video of like some receivers doing drills on a jugs machine, and I added him. I was like, bro, y'all need to do this. And dude replied, he was like, how about you come down here and do it for us?
And
Shout
that's
out Bryce
where
Treggs,
Pierre was
man.
born.
Shout out to Bryce Treggs. But no, man, like I was saying, I think just overall, Dallas Goedert, just the inconsistency, man, just from an injury standpoint. When he's healthy, he's a really good football player. It's just he isn't consistently healthy.
Yeah, man. And I mean, the flashes were always there. It's
Yeah,
just, like you said, a consistency thing.
yeah.
Also,
So
who would you put at 3?
for me, this might surprise you. I don't know if you, I don't know, depending on how you look at it, but I put Fletcher Cox to Jalen Carter at 3. And I put that there just because like it was kind of sort of expected, like Jalen Carter, in terms of his like free draft eval. A lot, the analysis you heard was generational defensive tackle. Like this guy has the ability to be possibly the best football player or best defensive football player someday, right? Um, I think a lot of the chatter around Jalen had to do with the more off the field stuff rather than the on the field stuff. Just and yeah, again, like I said, just because it was expected, like he was heralded as a generational talent, right? And so him replacing Fletch, who was also one of the best defensive tackles in team history, and through his first 2-3 years, him essentially living up to replacing a guy like Fletch, who again was one of the best defensive tackles in team history. Um, it isn't really that surprising to me. You look at, the season he's had this year, right? And it's kind of, I don't think it's stretched to say it's been his best year so far as a pro. It's just him, continuing to, live up to the hype.
I can understand that. Actually, for me, number 3 was actually Kelsey and Jurgens. I said that because I mean, it's a cool story and all, but I think it kind of takes some of the luster away that Kelsey kind of handpicked them. You kind of looking for a clone of yourself. I mean, the Eagles knew what they were looking for. You had a type, for lack of a better term. Like you saw the importance of Jason Kelsey to this offense, and what having a Jason Kelsey and like I mentioned a few weeks back, a Jason Kelsey in a bigger size, which was the most important thing of this, was kind of important to imperative to making this offense run like it does. I mean, like I said, it was pretty cool to see. It was the big thing was always hoping that Cam turned out to be quote unquote he lived up to be what he was supposed to be, quote unquote, the Kelsey. Now, I mean, if you ever watched Cam dating back to his time in college and even in the earlier portions of his preseason play, like the flashes were always there. He was always a very mobile guy. Just having the opportunity to learn from Kelsey, playing beside Kelsey, learning the nuances from Kelsey, I think helped expand his game and help him reach the point that he's at this point right now.
Yeah, and so for me, I had the Jason Kelsey to Cam Jurgens transition at 2. Um, and I think, like you talked about the story, but I think there's, some legitimacy to that, right? Like being the handpicked replacement for quite possibly one of, if not the greatest center in the league's history. I think that's a feat in and of itself, right? And, but to actually, replace him and the unit like seemingly not miss a beat, like that's insane to me, right? Like he played 2 seasons before, so I guess you can say he kind of had a feel for the game or whatever. But seeing it live in action, like him, this being his first season replacing Jason, and having a Pro Bowl year like right off the bat, like to me that has to count for something, right? And I think it's just a credit to Cam.
I guess I don't want to take anything away from Cam, but I don't guess how I look at it is it's not like they didn't put him in these positions prior. He may not was the starting center while during his times here, but I'm sure they have utilized more than enough time and resources to get Cam snaps at center. Just like I'm pretty sure. I mean, God, I joked with you guys watching the Giants game. Like, God forbid us have to see any Nick Gates center snaps because those were bad. But I'm pretty sure they get Landon Dickerson center snaps too in the event that he would have to play there or so. Like these guys, they're prepared for this, and I mean that kind of like you mentioned about the Jalen Carter thing. This kind of went into their draft profile of how versatile these guys were. So the fact that it worked out for them, I guess it wasn't really a surprise for me. But for me, at 2 was actually the offensive line. I mean, the offensive tackle situation. With it was hard not to put that at 1, but I'll explain why I put what I want in a second. But I put this at 2, and I mean we've had the conversation before. I just mentioned it before we got on. But to being able to take a guy who hasn't played football before and to turn him into the level of tackle, like I honestly genuinely think he should get some all-pro conversations heading into this season. He's been that good. I mean, we've all seen the stat about how often the Eagles leave their 2 tackles on islands, and him and Lane Johnson are just head and shoulders above everyone else in terms of the success level that they have. And again, it's amazing. It kind of speaks volumes to what Jeff Stoutland has been able to do and why he's so good. Again, I get to it in a second. Comment on it.
And that's why I put it at 1. Like this, like I don't know if like people really understand. Like this is a guy who never played organized football before, right? Like he never stepped foot on a football field, and he's legit a top 5 offensive tackle in the league. Like you just said it. Like PFF have him and Lane Johnson as quite possibly their best, players. Like just in general, like independent of position. Like Jordan Mailata, like.
No, I think Jordan Mailata is literally the highest rated player in all of football at the 96.
Yeah, and again, like he'd never played football before, right? So like to go from never touching a football field before to in what 5-6 years being one of the best football players or the best football player in general in the league.
But it kind of speaks volumes to how as I always harp on during the off season, the ability to get these guys in, get them behind. And I mean, where the conversation has been stemmed from in first place, get them behind if there was anybody outside of Jeff Stoutland that was going to be able to help Jordan Mailata make this transition, it was going to be Jason Peters, who was a freaking tight end when he got into the league and then transitioned to tackle when he got here, like just because he was a freak athlete. So, I mean, kind of like the conversation of Kelsey and Juergens, I'm sure that Peters saw a lot of himself in Mailata, and all it was more so teaching him the nuance of the position. Which, if you learn a nuance from Jeff Stoutland, Jason Peters, and Lane Johnson, I think you got a pretty damn good chance of being good. But for number 1, I mean, I thought it was really interesting that you had it at 3.
Yeah.
For me, I get what you're saying in terms of draft profile, and Jalen Carter was supposed to be this good. I think it's really hard to find, especially it comes down to how good he has actually been. It's one thing to having the profile of being there, like Cam Juergens was supposed to have the profile of being like Jason Kelsey. The fact that he's lived up to it is what kind of made it even more impressive. Jalen Carter has had the profile of being one of these top guys in the league, and we joked around and we threw around the name Aaron Donald, but in reality, he has been that dominant, and it really didn't take it. He didn't miss a beat, and I mean, I just thought it's pretty cool being able to It's one thing going from a really good, arguably the best center in football to probably a top 5 center. It's one thing to go from arguably a top 3 tackle in football to, I mean, we can pick your poison to say top 3. PFF has him ranked at 1, but I mean, you can have the conversations about guys like Slater, Worth, a bunch of guys who, I mean, hell, Deion Dawkins had a really good year this year. That it's a real conversation. But when you have the conversation about tackle, I don't think there's much to be able to go from a guy in Fletcher Cox who, in his heyday, he was easily the number 2 defensive tackle in football behind Aaron Donald. And to go from that to a guy who's the best defensive tackle in football and has actually lived up to the, like, it's one thing to be the best at it and be the best in the league full of the competition that's there. But I think when you have conversations about Jalen Carter, you start comparing him to some of the greats at this point. And I mean, I hope it ain't crazy to say because he still has a long career to play. But if he continues to play at the level that he's playing right now, the conversation ain't crazy of him being one of the more dominant defensive tackles that the league has ever seen. Like basically taking the crown that Aaron Donald has left there, that Chris Jones has kind of carried for a second. Like it's right there for him.
You're just keeping the seat warm, buddy.
Just give me one more year.
Well, no, man, I think for me, like that was the reason that I put it at 3. Like, I don't want to say, I expected this, but like, for me, in terms of draft evals, when you use the word generational, like I tend to expect
people
greatness
from
generational. I mean, yeah, it's not often. I mean, you go back over the last couple of drafts. I mean, you got Andrew Luck. I don't think that's hyperbole to say he lived up to it. Trying to think,
quote unquote. Trevor
Lawrence. Can you say? But I'm saying like guys who have actually lived up to it though.
Oh, okay. Hell, Andrew Luck and probably, if there's anybody else, they're probably Penny Sewell.
Yeah,
he was supposed to be generational. That may be Jalen Ramsey,
but he wasn't a number with. I mean, yeah. Well, he was a guy that got the generational tag, so yeah, I think you can say that. Yeah,
that may be about it. Outside of those, like it's really, that's why I kind of put it at 1 because it's different. I think it's a different level between having a conversation of you got drafted with the tag of being generational and you're pretty freaking good. Like, don't get me wrong, you one of the top players in the league, but you aren't generational compared to you coming in and actually living up to this generational tag.
I mean, I get it. But it's really interesting, to look at, like you talked about leading into it, just overall like roster construction and, just kind of, I guess lead that the Eagles have on it from, compared to most teams across the league. Like it's not normal that, you're able to go from, one set of like really, really extremely good, like generational type talent. And, within 2-3 years, you replace them with those same levels of talent.
And it kind of goes like, I'll never forget. It was an episode of P's and Q's Pod. Me and Parth had my good guy, Brad PFF. Well, he formerly a PFF, Brad Spielberger on. And he mentioned to us basically how we were basically asking the question, like, what do the Eagles have to do to get better front office wise in the league? And his response shocked us because this was long before how he took over the league and things of that nature. Whereas he kind of stated how a lot of teams in the league have viewed for years what the Eagles have done in terms of front office wise, the moves that they've made, it's the ability to navigate the cap the way that they've had, some of the draft selections, the way they've been able to get some of those. Like, it's been at the top of the league for a while. Like, that's the team that people were calling, like, well, how did you do this? I didn't even know this was legal. Kind of pulling off the loopholes that we kind of laughed, like the Bill Belichick-esque kind of things. And like I was just saying, it kind of speaks volumes to the program that this Eagles front office has been able to build. Hell, still to this day, I believe the Jets just asked to interview one of our front office people yesterday, where it's like, it's a never-ending supply here at the NovaCare complex.
Yeah, if you look around, like most teams' front offices, like a lot of guys have Eagles tags. Like I know you got Andrew Berry in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
You got, I think there's a guy in with the Giants.
I think it's a guy in Houston. I can't remember. Was it Elliott Wolf or something like that? I can't remember if he's still there.
Yeah, but a lot of like that's the Eagles. Howie Roseman talked about the quarterback factory. It's really a personnel factory.
Exactly, and that's a great way to put it. And I mean, be honestly speaking, I mean, of course, we know we're purely Eagles fans. We keep track of what's going on around the league, but probably not more as what we do in Philadelphia. But can you think of another team that kind of constantly gets their office personnel poached as much as Philadelphia?
Baltimore or Buffalo would be the first two that pop off the top of my head.
Baltimore, certainly, but I mean, I believe outside. I mean, Ozzy had a couple people on this tree.
Pittsburgh too, though.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
That's interesting. I had to look into Pittsburgh.
But I don't know. I mean, I think it's like a lot of those like I don't know which way to phrase it, like legacy-esque franchises, like the franchises who've been consistently good for long stretches of time. Like every time you see those lists where it's like teams with the most wins since like 2001 or 2002, yeah, you see teams like the Eagles, like the Packers, like Pittsburgh, like Baltimore, like all of those upper echelon, really, 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 high end teams. And I mean, I don't think it should be a shock to anybody that, teams want to, poach guys from those front offices.
So speaking of poaching guys, it's been rumored that the Saints have asked to speak to Kellen Moore for their head coaching vacancy. What's your thoughts on this?
I understand it. Kellen, he's been a guy that's gotten, head coaching interviews and looks before. The Eagles interviewed him before they hired Nick Sirianni. So I mean, it shouldn't come as a shock to anybody. Like Kellen's a good football coach, right? Like this is a guy who's coordinated, top 3, top 5, top 10 offenses, in the past. Like even this year, like despite all of the quote unquote drama, if you want to phrase it that way, that the Eagles had. I mean, for most of the year, their offense has been, pretty good. Like it's been, in the upper quartile of the league that's passing or running, right? But like I said, it doesn't surprise me. Just from the Eagles' perspective, it kind of stings because, and I don't know if they're gonna hire him, but you'd like to see Jalen, have continuity at his offensive coordinator spot. Because the one time he did from year 2 to year 3 with Shane Steichen, we saw the level of performance or level of play that he can reach. But I mean, like I said, I think I understand it. It's just I wish, or I'm not gonna say I hope they don't hire him because I want Kellen to, I'm a Kellen Moore fan. I want him to, succeed. But yeah, I get it. I get it.
My man got it's not the meme with the smile on his face, but he crying with the fist under the smile. Like, I'm happy for you, Kellen. Not a chill guy.
What Tyree said? Congratulations.
Nah, but I think, well, I guess I could start with the fact that I was kind of speaking with myself about it early on. I don't think he gets a head coaching gig unless we go on a deep run. We'll see how this all goes, like probably Super Bowl run. But even then, I think what has gotten him consideration, at least this year, because like you said, he's had offenses. We spoke in volumes during the offseason about what he did in Dallas, what he did with the Chargers, and now what he's been able to do with this offense. But I think what stands out the most to me about what he's able to do with this offense is, and I guess not even just here, his offenses are super quarterback friendly, man. We've seen the success that Jalen's been able to have. We heard Kenny basically say, yeah, Kellen has never had a chance to call a game for me. I think with a week of game planning, we'll be all right for Kenny to come out there and look great. We see him getting Tanner out on the move. I kind of talked about that on Twitter where people ask why utilize these kind of play action boots for Tanner, but not Jalen. And I mean, I kind of got into the root of how Jalen is a part of the zone read RPO portion of the offense. So that kind of takes that away there. And then even then, Jalen is a mobile quarterback. So if there is a free rusher, you can kind of put it on Jalen's shoulders to either find the hat or beat him and make an impact with his legs versus Tanner doesn't have that ability. So it's kind of good to move his spot. So it's the things that he do for his quarterbacks. And you could even say that about his time in LA, where he was really good for Herbert. And when Herbert went down, he was able to get the most out of Easton Stick. So, I mean, the resume is there for him. Now, like as I continue to say, for some odd reason, I think he stole somebody's wallet or something because he just doesn't get these calls. He doesn't get the job. I don't know what it is. Like you said, I'm rooting for him to get these opportunities at some point. The one thing that concerns me the most about should he get it is what exactly would the plan be? Because I mean, the goal would be to hire in-house, but I think
we've talked about this. We've talked about this. We know what the plan is.
What?
Kevin Patullo, he finally finna get.
Come on, man! Look. That's a conversation we're gonna have in the off season because I think it's gonna be one of those Doug Peterson, Press Taylor conversations where he's gonna say Kevin Patullo, you know, he's been here, he's seen it all, he's my guy, and they're gonna be like, I don't know about that, brother. Let's go look through some other options, and they'll get back to you. And you know,
doesn't work for me, brother.
Yeah. And I mean, it'd be cool to say, let's go Doug Nussmeier, but Doug Nussmeier has essentially followed Kellen everywhere he's went. He's been his quarterback coach. So it's only right to assume that whenever Kellen gets a head coaching gig, he's going to be his offensive coordinator.
Yeah. But you know, you brought it up during your point about Kellen, just in terms of the deep playoff run, man. And you know, we broached this topic, you know, before the start of the season, just looking at the picture from a grand scheme type of view. But now, since we know the Eagles, you know, first round playoff opponent, wild card playoff opponent, what's at stake for them during this playoff run? You know, like I said, we talked about it before the start of the season, you know, and my sentiment was, you know, anything less than an NFC championship appearance, essentially it's a failure to me. And I stand by that, right? Like, you know, you look at everything that this team has accomplished this year, right? Like winning double-digit games in a row, right? Figuring it out after a questionable 2-2 start. You know, they went to Baltimore and beat them on the road. You know, they and I mean Dallas, they've been hurt, but sweeping Dallas, you know, legit almost sweeping, you know, Washington, sweeping the Giants, like
the hell was that?
What?
Almost sweeping Washington. How the hell did that get included in here?
No, I mean, it's a fact. I'm just saying, like, it's like almost sweeping your division, basically. What I'm saying, but you know, like all the chatter at the start of the season, you know, about Sirianni and Jalen and their relationship, right? The questions, you know, throughout this year about the passing game and the drama that came with that, you know, to now being, you know, 100% healthy, number 2 seed in the conference, like it's a lot at stake for this team, right? Like. Even go back to 2022, right? They made the Super Bowl. You know, they lost in the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts had quite possibly the best performance of any quarterback in the Super Bowl era in a losing effort, right? Then, you know, 2023, how that season ended. Like, there's a lot at stake for this team. Like, Sirianni's job has been, you know, it's been and it continues to be questioned, even to this, you know, very moment. Like, I think I saw something on Twitter either yesterday or the day before yesterday where it was like, the Eagles don't have a deep playoff run, should they fire him? Like, there's a lot at stake for this team.
This conversation it's frustrating because I can understand why people can say that. I mean, when you just outline all that the team has accomplished up to this point. I mentioned on Twitter earlier this week, I think we continue to lose sight of the quote unquote 3-year window that this team has basically set for itself to get to this point. I mean, to a Super Bowl and accomplish that goal. I think that the Saquon record has kind of like tarnished what's going on.
To an extent.
I don't want to say anything less than an NFC championship appearance is a failure. It'll definitely be a disappointment. I continue to harp back on it comes down to how you lose these games. You probably can't lose round 1 to a Packers team that has struggled against big games opponents, as you've outlined. It'll be interesting to see what a second round opponent looks like. Could potentially be Tampa Bay. So who knows what that matchup would do or what it would mean. It's interesting, man. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Jalen Hurts' personal hell. Speaking of Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But yeah, man. We're gonna be back on Friday to like fully preview this matchup, really dive into the weeds of it. We're releasing this as a pod episode. But before we get out of here, you got anything else you want to touch on?
I'm good, brother.
One question. What's your most surprising firing or not non-firing, or what's your most surprising happening from Black Friday so far?
Black Wonder.
Black Monday, I'm sorry.
You're racist.
That's crazy.
Nah, but outside of probably Gerard Mayo, that was probably the most frustrating. I don't want to call it. I kind of seen it writing on the wall when he won that game. Any coach that was coming back would want the number one pick. I don't care what they say. We've seen Doug Peterson he get fired and still make that kind of decision. Where I mean, if you think there's a chance that you come back, you want to set yourself up into its best position. So the writing was kind of on the wall. I'd probably say the Jaguars not firing Trent Baalke is head scratcher.
I don't understand it.
You're essentially setting your franchise back 3 to 5 years again because you're not going to get the right coach. And if you do, as my guy Dilla said, you kind of did it on accident. So, oh, buddy, every year we get to this point, now we're so appreciative of what we've built. It may not be perfect, but
at least we ain't that.
Yeah. It could definitely be worse.
That's always my main thing, like you said, when we get to this time of the year, like you look at some of these teams around the league and the choices and decisions that some of the people in charge make, and you're just like scratching your head. It's like, brother,
the Jets out here, they said one of the main candidates was going to be
Matt Nagy.
Rex Ryan, brother. Like,
I mean, the Rex Ryan thing, I kind of little bit get it. Like
he got to take the Mike Zimmer role, brother. You don't just get to walk back in here and be a head coach. You better go coordinate somebody's team and earn your stripes back. What are we doing?
Well, no, I kind of get it. Like he's been there before. You got the brash bravado that he brings. The New York media is gonna like it. Like I get it. Woody Johnson, he likes being in the limelight, the storylines, and everything like that.
You want to win?
I mean, obviously that's the goal, but not all ownership is Jeffrey Lurie.
I don't know, man. Some people that 100% really like the goal.
Yeah, again, 100% thankful for Jeffrey Lurie and the organization that he empowers Harry Roseman to build and what the Eagles are. Because again, some of these teams very questionable. But before we get out of here, on whichever podcast streaming platform you're listening on, be sure to leave us a like and a review. Rate us 5 stars. We're gonna be back on Friday for a stream previewing this matchup. And we might bring a little guest, a friend along. So definitely tune in for that. But yeah, I think that's gonna do it for this episode. I think we touched on everything that we had. You got anything else to add, brother?
Go Birds.
Go Birds.
Cut that jello on.